He was the best-dressed man in any room he entered. He shook hands at charity events, greeted neighbors by name, and held court at the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy like a head of state receiving dignitaries. But John Joseph Gotti was not a statesman. According to federal prosecutors, he was the boss of the most powerful organized crime family in the United States, the Gambino family, and for years the law could not touch him. John Joseph Gotti, the King of Queens. Born in 1940 to Fanny and John Gotti Sr., one of 13 children, Gotti grew up in poverty across the outer boroughs of New York City. By his early teens, he was running with street crews tied to the Gambino crime family, one of the so-called five families that had dominated organized crime in New York since the 1930s. He was smart, fearless, and understood the one currency that mattered on those streets: loyalty, or the convincing performance of it. By the mid-1980s, Gotti had clawed his way to the top. But running the most surveilled criminal organization in America comes with a certain kind of problem. And the federal government was about to make it his. Here's the problem prosecutors had faced for decades. The mob doesn't get its hands dirty. A boss gives no written orders. He makes no phone calls that can be recorded. At least that's the design. By the time a crime is committed, the person who commanded it is 3 layers removed, eating dinner in a restaurant with 50 witnesses. Proving it in a courtroom felt for most of the 20th century nearly impossible. Congress decided to change that. In 1970, lawmakers passed the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. The statute, championed by future U.S. Attorney General Robert Blakey, was radical in its architecture. It didn't just target individual crimes. It targeted the enterprise behind them. Under RICO, prosecutors could charge an entire criminal organization and prove that its leaders were responsible for a pattern of criminal behavior, even if those leaders never personally committed the specific acts in question. 2 or more related crimes called predicate acts over a 10-year period was enough to establish that pattern. Suddenly, distance from the crime was no protection. The boss was no longer safe behind his underlings. And in New York, a group of prosecutors had decided to test this weapon against the most high-profile target they could find. 3 times, and counting. The federal government came for John Gotti 3 times before 1990. 3 times they failed. And each acquittal wasn't just a legal loss, it was a spectacle. Gotti walked out of courthouses smiling, waving at supporters, his double-breasted suits immaculate. The press gave him a nickname that would define the era: the Teflon Don. Nothing stuck. In 1986, he was acquitted on assault charges. In 1987, acquitted on federal racketeering charges. In 1990, acquitted again on charges stemming from a construction union assault. Each time, the prosecution's case crumbled, sometimes due to weak evidence, sometimes due to witness reluctance. But investigators had begun to suspect something more deliberate was happening. Jurors, they believed, were being tampered with. And one juror from the 1987 trial would later admit to accepting a bribe of $60,000. The FBI was watching. Every acquittal told them more about how Gotti's organization operated and gave them more time to build a case that couldn't be dismantled from the inside. The next attempt would be different. Because this time, they wouldn't need to rely on hostile witnesses or reluctant jurors. They had the walls of the Ravenite talking for them. The Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street in Lower Manhattan was John Gotti's throne room. Every week, members of the Gambino family would report there: bosses, captains, soldiers, a procession that FBI agents photographed from across the street for months. What Gotti didn't know was that federal agents had done something far more invasive than photograph. In 1989, they planted listening devices, bugs, inside the club itself, including in an upstairs apartment where Gotti conducted his most sensitive conversations. What those bugs captured was extraordinary. Gotti, speaking freely, discussed criminal operations, complained about associates, and placed himself at the center of decisions that prosecutors had spent years trying to pin on him. He had been operating under the assumption that certain locations were secure. He was wrong. But surveillance recordings, while powerful, were only part of the government's new architecture. The other part had a name: Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. When Gravano heard on those same recordings Gotti criticizing him behind his back, blaming him for problems, distancing himself, something shifted. The FBI moved quickly. Gravano agreed to cooperate with the government, becoming the highest-ranking American mafia figure ever to turn state's evidence. The Teflon Don's inner circle had fractured from the inside. On January 21, 1992, the trial of United States versus John Gotti opened in the Eastern District of New York. It was, by any measure, the most consequential organized crime trial in a generation. Gotti faced a 14-count RICO indictment. The charges included murder conspiracy, obstruction of justice, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and tax evasion. If convicted on all counts, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. To prevent jury tampering, the weapon that had undone every previous prosecution, the jury was anonymous and sequestered for the duration of the trial. Jurors' identities were sealed. This was a direct response to what the government alleged was a deliberate and systematic effort to corrupt prior proceedings. The centerpiece of the government's case was Sammy Gravano, who took the stand and delivered 8 days of testimony detailing the inner workings of the Gambino family, confirming Gotti's role as boss and corroborating the surveillance recordings. Gotti's defense team attacked Gravano's credibility relentlessly, arguing he was a career criminal trading testimony for leniency, but the recordings were harder to explain away. In one of the most damaging moments of the trial, jurors heard Gotti's own voice, casual, authoritative, discussing the organization he now claimed through his attorneys to have no connection to. On April 2, 1992, after 13 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict, guilty, on all 14 counts. The Teflon Don, the man who had beaten the government 3 times, who had walked out of courthouses grinning while supporters cheered, sat expressionless. As the foreperson read the verdict aloud, Judge the First Leo Glasser sentenced Gotti to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. Gotti died in prison on June 10, 2002 from throat cancer. He was 61 years old. By the time of his death, the Gambino family, like most of the 5 families, had been fractured by successive RICO prosecutions. The era of the untouchable mob boss was, for all practical purposes, over. But the Gotti case left something more than a conviction on the books. It became the proof of concept that RICO, wielded correctly, could bring down even the most insulated criminal organization. The combination of patient electronic surveillance, protected juries, and a cooperating insider from the highest levels of the enterprise had, finally, produced a result that held. Prosecutors across the country studied it. The playbook was written. The Teflon Don had, for years, moved through the world as though he were immune to law, to consequence, to the weight of what he'd built. In the end, it wasn't a lack of ambition that brought him down. It was the walls he trusted, the men he trusted, and a law specifically designed to make trust inside a criminal empire its greatest. And that's the story of how the Teflon Don finally ran out of Teflon. If you enjoyed this one, like and subscribe. These videos take a serious amount of time to put together, and honestly, your support means everything. And drop a comment below. Who do you want me to cover next? Lucky Luciano? Al Capone? Meyer Lansky? The list is long and you're picking the next one. See you soon.